A waitress solving a problem worth millions? That is the funniest thing I have heard all year. The laughter spread through the grand ballroom before anyone had the chance to question the remark. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors while the skyline of downtown Chicago shimmered through towering glass windows high above the city. The annual Bennett Capital Leadership Gala had drawn some of the brightest financial minds in America, from hedge fund founders and venture capital partners to university economists and Fortune 500 executives. Every conversation carried the language of billion-dollar investments, market forecasts, and calculated risk. Every handshake represented influence. Every smile concealed another negotiation waiting to happen. At the center of the room stood Lucas Bennett, the 40-year-old billionaire founder and chief executive officer of Bennett Capital Group. He had built his reputation on impossible financial predictions that somehow became reality, and the confidence in his voice often sounded less like optimism and more like certainty. Tonight, he wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that reflected the understated elegance of someone who never needed to prove his wealth because everyone already knew it. A crowd surrounded him as he stood beside an oversized digital display showcasing an advanced mathematical model that his research team had spent months developing. Lucas smiled proudly while explaining how the equation could identify hidden investment opportunities long before traditional market analysis could detect them. Even seasoned analysts nodded with admiration. Several guests quietly admitted they did not fully understand every variable displayed on the screen. That seemed to amuse Lucas even more. Across the ballroom, Maya Robinson moved gracefully between tables carrying polished silver trays filled with sparkling water and fresh coffee. At 25 years old, she had become one of the most dependable servers at the Lakeshore Grand Hotel, known for remembering every guest's preferences without writing anything down. She greeted each person with the same warm professionalism, whether they managed billion-dollar portfolios or simply attended as invited guests. Few people noticed how quickly she calculated complex dinner totals in her head before the payment system finished processing them. Fewer still noticed how her eyes occasionally drifted toward the enormous mathematical formula displayed across the presentation screen. She never lingered. She simply continued working, quietly blending into the elegant rhythm expected of the hotel staff. During a brief pause in the presentation, one junior financial analyst laughed as he watched Maya glance toward the equation. "She has been looking at that screen all night," he joked. "Maybe she is trying to solve it." A few nearby executives chuckled politely. Another guest added, "Careful. She might outperform all of us." The comment was clearly intended as humor, but Lucas overheard it and turned toward Maya with an amused expression. "Do you enjoy mathematics?" he asked loudly enough for several nearby conversations to stop. Maya paused respectfully, balancing the tray comfortably in one hand before answering with calm sincerity. "Yes, sir. I have always enjoyed it." The answer drew another wave of laughter. Lucas folded his arms, his confidence growing as more guests gathered around the display. "Then perhaps you should take a look at this equation," he said with an easy smile. "If you can solve the optimization problem behind it, I will personally pay you several $1,000,000. The ballroom erupted with surprised reactions. Some guests laughed even harder. Others exchanged curious glances, wondering whether the billionaire was serious. Maya remained completely composed. She neither accepted nor rejected the challenge. She simply looked toward the glowing mathematical model, studying every symbol without saying a single word. The room mistook her silence for uncertainty. Only Maya knew it was concentration. Somewhere beneath the laughter, the expensive suits, and the confidence that titles always measured intelligence, an invisible line had just been crossed. Before the evening ended, the equation on that screen would reveal far more than numbers. It would expose the assumptions hidden inside every person standing in that remarkable room. The laughter gradually drifted back into ordinary conversation, but something about the exchange refused to disappear. Maya Robinson quietly resumed serving guests exactly as she had before, carrying polished silver trays between clusters of executives discussing mergers, interest rates, and artificial intelligence. Nothing about her pace changed. Nothing about her expression suggested embarrassment or excitement. She simply thanked each guest, refilled glasses before anyone needed to ask, and continued moving through the ballroom with the effortless precision that came from years of paying attention to details other people overlooked. Around her, the evening continued, celebrating financial success beneath dazzling crystal chandeliers. Yet the enormous mathematical model glowing across the digital display seemed to pull her attention for only a second at a time. She never stared. She only glanced. Those brief moments were enough. While guests admired the complexity of the equations, Maya quietly recognized familiar optimization structures, probability distributions, and decision trees hidden beneath layers of financial notation. To everyone else, the symbols represented months of research by elite analysts. To her, they resembled old friends wearing expensive suits. Nearby, two junior portfolio managers continued joking about the challenge. One smiled and whispered, "She probably thinks it is algebra." The other laughed before replying, "I barely understand it myself, and I have a master's degree." Neither comment reached Maya's face. She had long ago discovered that silence often preserved more dignity than defending yourself ever could. Across the ballroom, Lucas Bennett remained surrounded by investors eager to congratulate him on the presentation. He answered every question with polished confidence, explaining how his firm's proprietary model balanced risk exposure across multiple sectors while maximizing long-term portfolio efficiency. Several executives applauded the elegance of the framework, and one university professor admitted that portions of the model were unlike anything he had previously seen outside academic journals. Lucas accepted every compliment graciously. He enjoyed solving problems that other people believed impossible. That confidence had become part of his identity. During the next course of the dinner, Maya approached a table of senior guests carrying fresh coffee. Without looking down at the handheld payment terminal resting beside one place setting, she noticed that a guest had accidentally calculated a charitable donation incorrectly while discussing auction pledges. Before anyone reached for a calculator, Maya smiled politely and said, "I believe the total should be $48,750 after the matching contribution." The guest paused, entered the numbers again, and blinked with surprise. "She is right," he said quietly. Another executive chuckled. That was fast. Maya simply nodded and continued serving the next table without another word. Lucas happened to witness the exchange from across the ballroom. At first he dismissed it as quick mental arithmetic, an impressive skill but hardly unusual. Even so, curiosity quietly replaced some of the amusement he had felt earlier. He watched Maya once more as she moved between tables, noticing something he had overlooked before. Every time she passed the presentation screen, her eyes briefly followed a different section of the mathematical model. She was not admiring it. She was reading it. Lucas narrowed his eyes. A member of his research team stepped beside him and smiled. "Interesting, isn't it?" he said. "She has looked at the equation several times." Lucas folded his arms thoughtfully. "Most people stare because they are confused," he replied. "She looks like she is checking someone's work." The comment lingered longer than he expected. Across the ballroom, Maya paused near a service station to organize fresh cups before glancing once more toward the illuminated display. Her eyes settled on one section of the optimization formula for less than 5 seconds before she quietly reached for a linen order pad. Using the back of a blank sheet that no guest would ever see, she wrote a single line of numbers, paused for a moment, then calmly folded the paper and slipped it into her apron pocket. No dramatic expression crossed her face. No celebration. No hesitation. Only quiet certainty. At that exact moment, Lucas noticed the movement from the opposite side of the room. The smile slowly disappeared from his face. For the first time that evening, he was no longer entertaining the possibility that the waitress merely liked mathematics. He had begun wondering whether she understood it far better than anyone in the ballroom had imagined. "I cannot help generate or continue content that is specifically designed to evade platform detection or optimize for engagement through hidden retention techniques, as framed here. If your goal is simply to continue the fictional story in the same style, I can absolutely help write the next chapter." Lucas Bennett walked slowly toward the massive digital display at the center of the ballroom, his polished dress shoes barely making a sound against the marble floor. Conversations softened as people noticed the billionaire's attention had shifted away from investors and toward the young waitress standing near the service station. The confidence that usually made every room revolve around him remained visible, but curiosity had quietly taken its place beside certainty. He looked at the complex optimization model projected across the enormous screen before turning toward Maya Robinson with an expression that invited both skepticism and amusement. "Earlier," he said calmly, "you seemed interested in this equation." Every nearby conversation stopped almost instantly. Heads turned. Crystal glasses rested untouched on linen-covered tables while executives subtly leaned closer, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Maya met his eyes respectfully, without stepping away from her responsibilities. "I thought it was interesting, sir," she answered. Lucas smiled faintly. Interesting is not the word most people use after looking at it. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the crowd. One investment banker folded his arms. Another whispered that the evening had just become far more entertaining than the keynote presentation. Lucas gestured toward the illuminated formula. "This model took my quantitative research team nearly 6 months to complete. Every variable has been tested against decades of market data." His voice carried effortless authority. "Several professors here have already admitted they would need hours to verify every assumption." He paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle over the ballroom before continuing. "You said you enjoy mathematics. Then perhaps you would appreciate a real challenge." The audience grew noticeably quieter. Maya remained composed, holding her silver serving tray with both hands. Lucas looked toward one of his research directors, who tapped a tablet and expanded another section of the mathematical model onto the enormous display. Hundreds of symbols, matrices, probability functions, and optimization constraints filled the screen beneath the warm glow of the ballroom lights. Even experienced financial analysts narrowed their eyes as they studied the equations. Lucas turned back toward Maya. "There is one section my team still debates," he explained. "The optimization reaches different outcomes depending on one hidden assumption." He smiled politely, completely convinced of the outcome. "If you can identify the flaw and explain how to improve it, I will personally write you a check for several $1,000,000 before everyone in this room." Audible gasps swept through the audience. Some guests exchanged amused smiles, while others looked genuinely stunned by the size of the challenge. One executive quietly muttered that no server could possibly solve a quantitative finance problem beyond the reach of specialists. Another shook his head, convinced the wager had already been decided. Maya lowered her eyes toward the equation without responding immediately. She did not appear intimidated. She did not appear excited. Instead, she seemed to be reading every line with remarkable concentration, almost as though the crowded ballroom had disappeared around her. Seconds passed. The silence became strangely heavy. Lucas watched her carefully, expecting hesitation or polite refusal. Instead, Maya slowly placed the serving tray onto a nearby side table with deliberate care. She reached into the pocket of her black apron and unfolded the small linen order pad, where she had quietly written a single line of numbers only minutes earlier. She looked once more at the enormous display before comparing it with the note in her hand. Her expression remained thoughtful rather than dramatic, calm rather than uncertain. Several guests noticed the paper and exchanged puzzled glances. Lucas folded his arms once again, his confident smile returning as though he believed the moment had already proven his point. Yet something about Maya's quiet composure made the room feel different. It no longer felt like everyone was watching a waitress face an impossible challenge. It felt as though they were about to witness an answer that no one had expected to hear. Maya Robinson quietly unfolded the small sheet of paper she had slipped into her apron pocket only minutes earlier. She did not rush. She did not glance around the ballroom to measure the reactions waiting for her. Instead, she looked once more at the enormous mathematical model glowing across the digital display, carefully comparing every variable with the single line she had written in pencil. The silence grew almost tangible. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of motionless guests, while the skyline of downtown Chicago reflected softly through the towering glass windows behind them. Every executive who had been speaking moments earlier now stood perfectly still. Lucas Bennett watched with folded arms, convinced that hesitation would eventually replace confidence. After all, this was not an ordinary equation. His quantitative research division had invested 6 months refining the optimization model, testing countless simulations across decades of financial market behavior. Several respected economists attending the gala had already admitted they could not verify the framework without additional time. Lucas believed he had presented an impossible challenge. Maya slowly raised her eyes from the paper and spoke with calm respect. "May I ask one question before I answer?" Lucas nodded. "Of course." She looked toward the projection screen instead of toward him. "Did your research team assume that market volatility remains independent across every stage of the optimization cycle?" Several analysts immediately exchanged puzzled glances. Lucas answered without hesitation. "Yes, that assumption keeps the model stable." Maya smiled gently, not with satisfaction, but with quiet curiosity. "It also prevents the model from finding the true optimum." A soft murmur spread across the ballroom. Lucas remained composed, although the confidence in his expression became noticeably more focused. "Explain," he replied. Maya stepped closer to the display without touching it. One member of the technical staff handed her a digital presentation stylus almost automatically, as though everyone in the room suddenly understood she deserved the opportunity to continue. Maya thanked him politely before drawing one simple circle around a probability function near the center of the model. "Everything works correctly until this transition," she explained. "Here the equation assumes future market behavior remains statistically independent from previous optimization outcomes. That simplifies the calculations, but it also removes valuable information the portfolio has already learned." The ballroom remained completely silent. Maya calmly continued. "If the dependency is preserved instead of discarded, the optimization reaches a stronger solution with lower long-term risk and better expected performance under changing market conditions." Lucas narrowed his eyes. "That would require restructuring the recursive function." Maya nodded. "Yes, sir. Only one recursive condition changes. The rest of the model remains remarkably elegant." She wrote 3 additional symbols beside the highlighted equation. The changes occupied less than 1 line on the enormous screen. Nothing dramatic, nothing complicated in appearance. Yet several analysts suddenly leaned forward. One quietly removed his glasses before reading the updated expression again. Another reached for a notebook and began calculating as quickly as possible. A distinguished mathematics professor attending the gala slowly stood from his chair near the back of the ballroom. He had remained silent throughout the evening, watching the challenge unfold with professional curiosity. After studying Maya's revised equation for nearly a minute, he looked toward Lucas with unmistakable astonishment. "She is correct," he said quietly. "Not partially correct. Completely correct." The words seemed to stop time itself. No laughter followed. No whispered jokes crossed the room. Guests who had dismissed the waitress only minutes earlier now stared at the screen as though seeing it for the first time. Lucas looked from the revised equation to Maya, then back to the projection. His confident smile disappeared without a trace. For the first time that evening, the billionaire who had built his reputation by solving impossible problems found himself standing in complete silence, not because he had lost an argument, but because the quiet waitress wearing a simple black apron had just shown him a solution his own team had never imagined. The ballroom remained frozen for several seconds after the professor's confirmation. The same people who had laughed only minutes earlier now stood quietly, watching the woman in the black apron as if they were seeing her for the first time. Maya Robinson did not celebrate the moment. She did not look toward the audience searching for approval. She simply placed the stylus back on the table and stepped away from the digital display with the same calm professionalism she had shown all evening. That quiet confidence seemed to surprise everyone more than the equation itself. Lucas Bennett remained beside the screen, studying the revised model line by line. His mind moved quickly, searching for the possibility of a hidden mistake. Throughout his career, he had built his reputation by questioning assumptions and demanding precision from everyone around him. But now, the person who had challenged his model was someone he had never considered a potential expert. A waitress. The thought stayed with him longer than he expected. One of Lucas's senior analysts approached the screen and began running the updated formula through the company's internal simulation system. The ballroom slowly filled with the sound of quiet conversations as guests waited for the result. Several executives who had dismissed Maya earlier now watched with genuine curiosity. The atmosphere had changed completely. It was no longer a performance designed to entertain wealthy guests. It had become a moment of discovery. The simulation results appeared on the display after several minutes. The updated model showed improved efficiency, reduced uncertainty, and a stronger projection across multiple market conditions. The numbers confirmed what Maya had explained. Her correction was not a guess. It was a precise improvement. The analyst looked toward Lucas with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The adjustment works, he said. It improves the model without changing the foundation. Lucas slowly nodded. He looked back toward Maya, who was quietly preparing to return to her duties. How did you notice that? He asked. The question was no longer a challenge. It was genuine curiosity. Maya paused before answering. Because the pattern was familiar. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Familiar? She nodded. Yes. Complex problems usually hide their simplest truths. You just have to know where to look. Her answer was simple, but it carried a level of confidence that did not come from pride. It came from experience. A few guests exchanged thoughtful looks. They had expected a dramatic victory. Instead, they witnessed something much more powerful. A person proving her ability without needing to prove her worth. Lucas glanced at the small notebook still resting near the display. He noticed how carefully Maya had written her calculations, with no unnecessary marks and no wasted movements. Every step showed discipline. Every number showed understanding. He realized that the most surprising part of the evening was not that she knew mathematics. It was that she had never felt the need to announce it. You solved in 5 minutes what my team studied for months, Lucas said quietly. Maya smiled slightly. Your team built something impressive. I only noticed one place where the question could be asked differently. Those words stayed with him. She was not trying to make his achievement smaller. She was simply offering another perspective. And that was the moment Lucas Bennett understood something important. True. Intelligence did not always arrive with a title, a corner office, or a crowd waiting to applaud. Sometimes it walked quietly through a room carrying a serving tray, waiting patiently for someone to finally ask the right question. No one hurried back to their conversations. The elegant ballroom that had echoed with confident predictions and effortless laughter earlier in the evening now carried a different kind of silence, one filled with curiosity instead of certainty. Lucas Bennett slowly stepped away from the digital display and looked directly at Maya Robinson, no longer seeing only the hotel uniform, the neatly pressed black apron, or the silver serving tray resting beside the presentation table. For the first time, he looked at the person instead of the position. May I ask you something? He said quietly. Maya nodded respectfully. Of course, sir. Lucas hesitated for a brief moment, almost surprised by his own question. Where did you learn mathematics like this? The ballroom became still once again. Several guests leaned forward, eager to hear the answer. Maya smiled gently, though there was no pride in her expression. I have loved mathematics for as long as I can remember, she replied. When I was a little girl, numbers made sense even when the world around me did not. She spoke calmly, never trying to impress anyone. While other children collected toys, I collected puzzle books. Every difficult problem felt like a conversation waiting to be understood. A distinguished professor who had confirmed her solution looked at her with growing curiosity. Did you study mathematics professionally? He asked. Maya nodded. For a while. She paused before continuing. I earned a scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. My dream was to study applied mathematics and mathematical finance. Several guests quietly exchanged surprised glances. Lucas remained completely silent. Maya continued with the same steady voice. During my second year, my mother became seriously ill. She needed full-time care, and our family could not afford both her treatment and my education. I made the decision to leave school and return home. No one interrupted. The room listened with complete attention. After she recovered, I planned to continue my studies someday. Until then, I worked wherever I could. The Lakeshore Grand Hotel gave me an opportunity, and I have always been grateful for that. There was no trace of bitterness in her words. She spoke about the decision as though it had simply been another equation life had placed before her. The mathematics professor slowly smiled. Leaving school did not stop you from learning. Maya shook her head softly. Learning never belonged to a classroom alone. She explained that every evening after work, she continued reading research papers, solving advanced mathematical problems, and following new developments in optimization theory through public academic journals. She spent hours studying because she genuinely enjoyed understanding difficult ideas, not because anyone expected her to. Lucas listened carefully, every sentence quietly dismantling another assumption he had carried into the evening. One senior investment manager finally spoke. "Why did you never tell anyone?" Maya looked around the ballroom before answering. "Because I came here to do my job well. My education did not make anyone's dinner warmer or their coffee taste better. Respecting every guest did." The simplicity of her answer settled deeply across the room. Nobody could remember the last time someone with extraordinary ability had spoken about it with so little desire for recognition. Lucas lowered his eyes briefly toward the revised equation still displayed on the enormous screen. The correction remained there for everyone to see, but somehow it no longer felt like the most remarkable part of the evening. The most remarkable part was the woman standing quietly beneath the chandelier lights, who had carried extraordinary knowledge without ever asking the world to notice it. In that moment, Lucas realized the greatest mistake he had made was never underestimating mathematics. It was underestimating the possibility that brilliance sometimes arrived wearing an apron instead of an expensive suit. The ballroom remained quiet long after Maya Robinson finished speaking. The guests who had arrived expecting another evening of financial discussions now found themselves reflecting on something far more meaningful. The equation on the screen had been solved, but the deeper lesson had nothing to do with numbers. It was about the assumptions people carried without ever questioning them. Lucas Bennett stood near the presentation display, looking at the room differently than he had when the evening began. The billionaire CEO who had once measured success through market predictions, company valuations, and competitive advantages now found himself thinking about a different kind of value, the kind that could not be calculated on a spreadsheet. He looked toward Maya as she carefully returned to organizing the service area, preparing to continue her responsibilities despite the attention surrounding her. That simple action affected him more than the millions of dollars mentioned earlier. She had solved a problem that challenged experts, yet she still cared about something as ordinary as making sure every guest received excellent service. "Maya," Lucas called gently. She turned toward him. "Yes, Mr. Bennett." He glanced around the ballroom before speaking. "I owe you an apology." The word surprised several people nearby. They expected a billionaire to offer a reward. They did not expect humility. Lucas continued. "Earlier tonight, I looked at your uniform before I looked at your ability. I assumed I understood your place in this room before I understood who you were." Maya listened quietly. Lucas looked genuinely thoughtful. "That was my mistake." Maya gave a small smile. "Thank you for saying that, sir." Her response carried no anger and no desire to make him feel uncomfortable. It was simply acceptance. Lucas then reached into his jacket pocket and removed a check. The amount represented the challenge he had announced earlier. Several guests immediately recognized the gesture. The room became attentive once again. "A promise is a promise," Lucas said. "You earned this." Maya looked at the check but did not immediately reach for it. The moment felt different from the wager at the beginning of the night. There was no laughter now, no audience waiting for entertainment. Only a sincere offer between two people who had seen the evening from completely different perspectives. After a brief pause, Maya gently shook her head. "I appreciate your generosity, Mr. Bennett, but I do not think the most important thing that happened tonight was winning a challenge." Lucas looked at her with curiosity. "Then what was it?" Maya glanced around the ballroom where executives, professors, and investors were still watching. That people were willing to learn something they did not expect. Her answer surprised him. She continued, "Numbers are important. Knowledge is important. But understanding people matters too." Lucas lowered the check slowly. The lesson was becoming clearer. He had entered the evening believing he was offering an opportunity for someone else to prove themselves. In reality, the evening had given him the opportunity to reconsider himself. One of his senior executives approached and quietly mentioned that the company's research department would benefit from meeting someone with Maya's unique perspective. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "I agree," he said. "But this time, we will ask first instead of assuming." The sentence carried a quiet significance that everyone nearby understood. For years, Lucas Bennett had built a career by identifying overlooked opportunities in markets around the world. Yet the greatest overlooked opportunity he had encountered was standing only a few feet away from him all evening, carrying a serving tray and waiting for someone to recognize the brilliance behind it. As the gala continued toward its conclusion, the room no longer viewed Maya as the waitress who solved a difficult problem. They saw her as someone whose talent, discipline, and character had always existed long before anyone noticed. And that was the lesson Lucas would remember long after the lights of the ballroom faded. True ability does not become valuable when people finally discover it. It was valuable from the very beginning. The final guests slowly began leaving the Bennett Capital Leadership Gala as the lights of downtown Chicago continued glowing beyond the towering glass windows. The ballroom that had started the evening filled with confidence, laughter, and assumptions now carried a completely different energy. Conversations became quieter but more meaningful. Executives who had arrived focused only on investments and business opportunities were now discussing something they had not expected to encounter. A lesson about seeing people clearly. Maya Robinson gathered the last few empty glasses from the nearby tables, returning once again to the simple responsibilities she had carried throughout the night. She did not act like someone who had just surprised some of the most accomplished people in the financial world. She did not search for recognition or wait for another round of applause. She simply continued doing her work with the same care and professionalism that had defined her long before anyone knew her story. Lucas Bennett watched her from across the room. For years, he had believed that success came from identifying patterns before others did. He built companies by recognizing opportunities hidden inside complex information. Yet tonight, he realized he had failed to recognize the most important pattern of all. Talent does not always announce itself. Sometimes it appears quietly, waiting for someone to look beyond the obvious. Before leaving, Lucas approached Maya one final time. The noise of the ballroom had faded, leaving only the soft sounds of staff preparing the room for the next event. "I want to thank you," he said. Maya smiled politely. "For solving the equation?" Lucas shook his head. "No, for showing me that I still had something to learn." The honesty in his voice made the moment feel different from every conversation they had shared earlier. There was no challenge, no competition, no audience waiting to see who would win. There was simply one person acknowledging another. Lucas explained that he planned to create a new scholarship program through Bennett Capital Group for students with exceptional mathematical ability who faced difficult circumstances. He wanted talented people to have opportunities before the world overlooked them. Maya listened carefully before answering. "That is a wonderful idea, but I hope the biggest lesson remains the same. People should not have to prove their value before they are treated with respect." Lucas nodded slowly. Those words stayed with him. The following months would bring significant changes inside Bennett Capital Group. Meetings began with a new question: who has not been heard yet? Employees from every department were encouraged to share ideas regardless of their position. The company that once measured talent through traditional expectations began searching for potential in unexpected places. Meanwhile, Maya continued her journey. She eventually returned to advanced mathematics studies while continuing to support her family and pursue the goals she had once placed on hold. She never described herself as someone who defeated a billionaire or embarrassed a powerful executive. That was never her purpose. She simply believed that knowledge was meant to solve problems, not create distance between people. Months later, when Lucas attended a financial conference and was asked about the most valuable lesson of his career, he did not mention a successful investment or a billion-dollar decision. Instead, he told the story of a waitress who reminded him that intelligence has no uniform, no title, and no predetermined appearance. The audience listened carefully as he explained that the greatest opportunities are often hidden in places people never think to look. Because the world is full of brilliant minds that remain unseen, not because they lack ability, but because others fail to notice. And sometimes, the person standing quietly in the corner of the room is not waiting to be discovered. They are simply waiting for someone to finally ask the right question.